Good morning, Ben.
How are you, Sally?
Very good, thanks. This is exciting. We are at chapter 10.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing.
It's a real evidence of your passion and commitment and my capacity to hang in there.
I think you're passionate and committed as well, but it's been a team effort.
Yeah.
So we are at a new Australian narrative, Moonshots. A beautiful quote. The sky is not the limit. There are footprints on the moon. Buzz Aldrin. This chapter, Ben, you're sort of summing up, I guess, what the future would look like. Because last podcast we talked about movies of futures of where we want to be, and Australian leaders have an opportunity to focus the energy of the nation, and in doing that, a moonshot is what's being proposed. And you've got a definition here of a moonshot as a transformative nation-building project with a 30 to 50-year time frame that has a bipartisan support and focuses on developing our contribution to humanity and or building major physical infrastructure that creates or provides a vehicle for the creation of national prosperity.
That's it, Sally. My hypothesis is that human beings are driven by aspiration. They're driven by a lot of other things too, greed and fear and the need to solve problems. And there is a suggestion by some authors that Australia is a great problem-solving nation. You know, we solve problems so that we can survive. But ultimately, there's plenty of evidence around the place to suggest that human beings can achieve amazing things if they have a collective aspiration. And I think the best model we have, or the most obvious model we have in the world, is the Moonshot program that was established by Kennedy in 1961. And for anyone who is so moved, the YouTube channel that has the Moonshot address on it is certainly worth the watch, if you like.
Worth a watch, yeah.
It is just inspiring, and it just makes a lot of sense, you know. I mean, even if you think about how children learn, I mean, I'm always fascinated. We had four kids, and now I'm watching my grandkids. You know, they learn by just watching and then doing, and listening and then doing, and they never give up. So there's not too many of us now as 40-year-olds who didn't learn how to walk. There's not too many of us as 40-year-olds who didn't learn how to talk and do a whole range of other things, all because we just watched and listened. So, you know, modelling is such a powerful tool, and we have some great models in the world of countries and businesses that have achieved amazing things. And so my hypothesis for Australia is, given that at some levels I think we're a mediocre performer, we could create some aspirations that actually drive the conversation. You know, if you look at the level of conversation in the last month in Australia, or the last 6 months, you know, we've had the COVID, which is naturally a grouping of people who, in the first instance, driven by fear, have achieved amazing things. You know, even the vaccine, you know, is a moonshot happening in front of our eyes. You know, around the world, over 60 different businesses got their act together, came together in some levels of collaboration and cooperation, and we created a vaccine in somewhere between 6 and 9 months, which historically might have taken 6 to 10 years. So, you know, these things are possible, but, I mean, you don't need to wait for a crisis to set up a moonshot. You know, we could, you know, Kennedy set up the moonshot for the United States, and it had all sorts of, if you like, outflowing benefits. You know, as we speak, you know, and China's kind of a popular conversation in Australia at the moment for a whole host of reasons, they have a range of what if you call moonshot issues on the table. And there's no doubt they have a particularly long-term strategy. And I mean, the question I ask is, where's Australia's long-term strategy? At the moment they have this thing called the Belt Road Initiative, and it's a huge strategy, and it involves building a network of modern airports or ultra-modern airports, building a web of high-speed trains connecting its major cities, launching their own stem cell genetic engineering industry, and creating an electric car industry starting in 20 pilot cities. Now, if you had to go somewhere in Australia or some literature in Australia and work out what we were trying to achieve as a nation, you could go for a long time, because I've been looking for a long time and it's not all that clear to me what it is. We've got a modern manufacturing strategy, we've got some sort of digital strategy, we have a Northern Australian strategy. It's a bit like a potpourri soup, really. It's a little bit random as distinct from coherent. And there doesn't seem to be any will to have that level of coherence. I think it's quite disturbing. And if you do search around in our literature, there is some good work there, and I put together 10 moonshots, not so much because I believe these are the best moonshots Australia can aim at, but I put something out there because some of it is already published. It's just that nobody talks about it. And it just needs to be on the table. For example, I'll just walk through them quite quickly.
Yep.
Australia as the healthiest nation in the world. We certainly lead the world in many health-related areas, our Nobel Prize winners. We've had more Nobel Prize winners for health and related sciences than we've had for anything else. So, we have a great platform there. And when the Moonshot, the healthiest nation in the world, was published, I'll bet Bill Ferris, who published it in his innovation document, wasn't thinking about the COVID, because right now we probably are one of the healthiest nations in the world. He was probably thinking in terms of lifespan and age and a whole range of different health indicators, if you like. But right now, because of because we're an island, our geographic position, and some modestly good leadership, we're one of the healthiest nations in the world. But that's a great aspiration, and that needs to continue. Here's one that's close to my heart. We've always talked about mining as being the platform for our success, and prior to that, agriculture. We have a pretty amazing biotechnology sector in Australia. Why wouldn't that replace mining as a major driver of Australia's wealth creation? It's related to the healthcare area and certainly some of the others, ag tech and clean tech. You just kind of start to work in food tech companies. That would be one. Biotechnology. Why wouldn't we build an Australian Nestle, a global top 5 food and fibre brand? New Zealand's got Fonterra, but we blissfully have sold off many of our food companies to international businesses for all sorts of very good reasons, like we'll take $1 now. How many Australian businesses have actually bought an offshore business so that we can capitalise our competence? If you have another look, a national road transport system modelled on the best of the world. Now, I am continually gobsmacked that in this country, around each of the states, we still have different gauges operating. It leaves me absolutely bewildered. Not only that, I read in the Australian on the weekend that it's taken us over 25 years, longer, 30 years, to build a 5-star road going from Brisbane to Sydney. Now, on what planet is that an acceptable time frame? The Sydney-Brisbane road was always a horror road, but it's taken them 25 years to get it. And I suspect it's just an allocation of resources, which is a function of an allocation of commitment.
Yes.
And you just kind of wonder about these things. There's a whole range of ideas out there, a road or a rail system that goes from, say, Townsville to Kununurra or Broome, or Rockhampton to Geraldton. Why haven't we got a transport system that connects Australia? We had a telecommunication system that connected Australia in the very early days, and that was pioneering stuff, but we just don't seem to be able to get our act together. Why couldn't we be a renewable energy hub for the world, and specifically Asia? There's over 1 billion people in the world whose human development is somewhat limited because of the lack of energy. Why couldn't we be doing that? We've got more sun, we've got more water, we've got more land than most countries. We've got more technology and more intellectual grunt than most countries. Why haven't we been applying that to making a difference in the world instead of some of the appalling conversations we have in Australia about our own personal behaviours? It's kind of like water. Since I was a child, I've known that Australia was the driest country on earth, and pretty well every school child was taught that in my day. So why haven't we established a position where we're water resilient at a number of people, pick 70 million, so that there is no doubt that we would be water resilient at 70 million people if we had these things in place. Now, it's just extraordinary that we haven't done that. Israel, which was founded a long time after we were, started with two major disadvantages, if you like. They were likely to be blown off the face of the earth at any given point in time, and they had no water. So in 70 years, they've built the most sophisticated defence system in the world, and they have major technology companies queuing up to set up headquarters and research facilities in Israel. I suspect we've got some here, but not nearly as many, and maybe they're doing it for different reasons because of their lifestyle issues. They have a technology system to die for. Water. They lead the world in irrigation systems. Not only that, they tell me the desert is receding. We sit here and we have more rain in northern Australia than we need for the whole of Australia, but we don't seem to be able to capture it to do anything with it. We're very happy to run from droughts to floods to cyclones to bushfires and we kind of say, oh, well, that's the way climate change is and we should do something. But why wouldn't we be building a resilient system that allowed us to manage it? Australia in the top 10 defence technology exporters in the world. This was announced by Malcolm Turnbull back in his window of time when he was talking about innovation. And it's not an area of industry that I'm especially interested in, but wow, if we could be in the top 10 exporters, that would be a serious achievement, given probably where we are now. And that one that is close to my heart, the whole manufacturing sector. We've allowed it to decline from seriously about 30%, and it's down to 6% now. The actual graph of Australia's manufacturing.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Siri thinks this is a very important topic, Ben.
Yeah. I've lost my thread.
We're talking about Australian manufacturing sector and bringing it back to 15%.
Yeah, look, if you look at the decline of Australian manufacturing in the last 30 years, and it's only 30 years ago we were talking about being globally competitive in some of these areas, it looks like a black ski slope. For those of you who don't ski, a black ski slope is seriously steep, and it goes downwards. So, I just find it incredible that's been allowed to happen. And again, this issue with our trade links with Asia, we have to be more connected and more linked to the Asian market. It's the biggest middle class in the world over the next 50 years. So, it's certainly a great opportunity, and we have in place stable institutions and a robust economy now, so it could be huge. And maybe we could have an Australian space project, even possibly landing a person on the moon. Now, they're just 10 ideas. I mean, I'm sure there are greater minds than mine who could come up with better ones and smarter ones and more focused ones. But if we don't have something on the table, we can't talk about it. You've got to have a position. And I'm arguing that this is a position that Australia could take. You know, it's quite fortuitous at the moment, actually, that we're planning in Brisbane, as we speak, an application for the 2032 Common Olympic Games. Now, Australia takes great pride in its performance in sport, to the extent that we built an Institute of Sport to improve our overall sporting performance for the country. You know, after the Montreal Games, where we were judged to be serious underperformers, the government got its act together and set up the Institute of Sport. And it kind of culminated in the Sydney Olympics, where we were over the moon about what a wonderfully performing nation we are. And only recently I was listening to a podcast talking about, I think it was the celebration of 40 years for the Institute of Sport, and they were talking about the fact we needed to renew and refresh our position in Australian sport because since Sydney it's deteriorated a little. Look, we don't do that when we look at our position to do with any of the indicators I talked about.
No.
You know, prosperity is a generic measure that we could be looking at, and there are indicators out there that, in the world that we can benchmark against. So I can't understand why we're not just as interested and worried about our prosperity as we are about our performance in Australian sport. You know, so I do think that we need to just think harder about this and open ourselves to different conversations, and even the possibility of creating a new language. Look what COVID did for us. In a window of time, well, it wasn't too long, maybe a couple of months, we were able to change our language so that we knew what infection rates were, we knew what hospitalisation rates were, we knew what lockdowns were, we knew a whole range of new language came into our lexicon, if you like, with not much trouble. But we seem to have a lot of trouble getting into the conversation about wealth creation and prosperity and measuring those sorts of indicators that are important. So my hypothesis is, and I can go on to thinking about the next stages, how we can go about cracking this open, but it requires a leadership system that has imagination and foresight. And that's on both sides. That's in government and business and the not-for-profits, you know, the social cause marketing and businesses that are around the place. You know, we have to have some sort of strategic view of the world that allows Australians to unite behind something. You know, the federation is the lowest form of cooperation, if you like, so we have to rise above the federation. And part of the moonshot thing and building national infrastructure, we talk about nation-building projects, but there hasn't been many in Australia. And my definition of a nation-building project is it involves more than 3 states. So the project has to cross 3 state boundaries for it to be nation-building. You know, the Sydney Tunnel, I was thinking today, you know, the Sydney Tunnel was a major infrastructure project, and the Brisbane tunnels, they didn't do anything for Australia. They were great for Sydney. You know, and as the New South Wales will tell you, it's good for Sydney, it's good for Australia. But, you know, I think we need to kind of, some of the projects need to be bigger. A national road system, wouldn't that be an achievement, whatever that looks like? Or a national rail system, for God's sake. You know, we have, you know, in many respects, underdeveloped our nationhood. You know, we've used surrogate interventions to build our Australian identity, you know, and some of those have been wars. You know, wouldn't it be great if we could build a national identity on significant business and physical infrastructure achievements, or the difference we make in the world? I mean, they're the sorts of questions I think that this generation of leaders needs to be thinking about. And if I just kind of move into, if you like, a concluding phase, we need to be ultimately all of these things are a choice. We can choose to be a nation that does things, or we can choose to be a nation that doesn't do things. Currently, many of the things that are happening here are not the result of choice, it's a result of not choosing to do things. So, for example, we announced some 10 or 15 years ago how wonderful it was we made the transition from a mining economy to a service economy. Now I'm trying to work out when that decision was made. And I suspect we left it to the free market, which is a complete nonsense in my view. But if that's the case, I mean, there are some big questions we can actually think about, though. Much of our intellectual property is commercialised offshore. So if we're going to be an intellectual property hub, let's do it and be the best in the world at it and produce lots of it and sell it at a price. Or are we going to be a business incubator where we just grow small businesses here and then we sell them offshore? But let's make choices about it. Or do we want to be a business leader that actually adds value to products and industries and capitalise on the R&D that we spend $30 billion a year on? We could actually think about being a nation that transforms itself from a service economy to a serious high-technology industry hub for Asia and the world. And there's a series of things that we could do in sequence, or maybe in concert, that might leverage this position a little. We're really good at royal commissions in this country. Why wouldn't we have a royal commission into prosperity and do it every 10 years so that we could build, not give people answers, but scenarios for the future and allow people to buy into a much bigger conversation? I mean, it strikes me that there's a whole range of potential futures for Australia that we could explore much more intelligently than we currently do it. CSIRO produced a paper, to their great credit, on Australia 2060, and it was blithely dismissed by a number of economists in the media, and it never got life again. I mean, somehow the economists got to call the shot. So if we established this Royal Commission, we could then have an independent Prosperity Commission that worked on issues not unlike the Sports Commission. People might argue that the current government Department of Industry and Science does that, but I mean, I think it's bigger than a government department. It's something that almost has to be bipartisan, and it has to go beyond. It has to be a national Australian commission that works in some framework to create future scenarios and big picture thinking for the country.
Yeah. We kind of got an element of that with the National Cabinet that came out of COVID.
Embryonic. That's the start of it. But that is a good start. Sally, you're right. I mean, if they could come together every year and set down some parameters and give it to a Prosperity Commission to work on, that would be a great thing. And just maybe we'd be able to transcend this kind of, what feel like this federal kind of game playing that goes on between the states and then between the parties. It just limits everything. I think that there needs to be industry learning forums every 3 years to bring the industries together, and I'm not sure what form they take. Greater minds than mine might work on that, but I mean cross-industry forums that engage in a serious planning process that links into the work that's coming out of the Prosperity Commission, because part of this is just a general awareness. You don't always have to get answers out of some of these forums. You just have to bring people together who can talk to each other so they can make things happen when they go away from the forum. There's a social technology called open space technology, which allows this sort of conversation to happen in a more productive and open-ended way than the typical conference, which is a stand-up jug-to-mug, a vomitorium, really. And as people go to these conferences, say, well, I had a lot more fun at the sessions outside of the conference, out of the speakers, than I had with the speakers. Well, let's create the outside forum in the experience.
And it may well be that this step 4 becomes a first step too, Ben, if
it's already
we need to create a movement, so to speak.
It's already happening. I think the food industry's got their act together. I'm not sure about their process, but they've been having a global food forum every year for the last few years. But every industry ought to be having it, and people ought to go to cross industry.
The social enterprise industries have got it, and they call it global.
Do they?
A global and local movement called Global, and that crosses over a whole global footprint and connects a lot of regional social enterprises around Australia to global social enterprises as well. But see, they're kind of an industry in their own. So if they could bring that to the food industry and then to all the other sectors together, that's the ultimate version of learning, isn't it?
See,
the diversity.
It is, and in the end, Australia was started almost as a social experiment, and by 1920 it was being called that. We did a lot of socially innovative things in those early days of Australia, not the least of which was forming a federation. And we made it work, and radical things happened, like women got the vote, and that was pretty amazing in that era, and we could do more if we actually worked harder at doing it. But there's no imperative for us unless we're working towards something, and for Australians, as we stand, we're not working towards anything. It's all a little bit of she'll be right, it'll all happen in the end. Someone else is looking after that, or the government will fund it. Now, there's no doubt the government has a role. I mean, it's not as if you can just write them off. Business can't do it alone, because there's a few things that only the government can do. Not the least of which is make national calls about direction. The other thing they can do is they can provide long-term funding. And if you go through some of the major businesses in Australia, who are generally held out to be wonderful examples of Australian business, CSL and Qantas are two. They were both funded by government for their first 100 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know why people want to keep the government out of things. We wouldn't have either of those two entities if government hadn't stayed in for the long haul, a form of patient capital that allowed them to get to a stage where they could be listed, and then the government kind of profited from it. And that's exactly, I think, was what should happen with all R&D in Australia. I mean, I think it's a nonsense that we just give people money and they wander off into the sunset and then sell it to the highest bidder. But that's another issue. We should have a measurement system that actually measures for-profit businesses established as a result of our R&D investment. I think this notion of, when you look at the indicators of our innovativeness, if you like, if you go and look at Benchmark 21, a document produced by the Department of Foreign Affairs in Trade, we measure a lot of inputs. We've got the best universities in the world who produce the best papers. We have a high percentage of people who are well-trained, a whole range of inputs. We don't measure one of the most critical outputs of our innovation system, which is for-profit businesses that are established in Australia, that employ Australians, and that are sustainable over a long period of time. So look at Cochlear. Cochlear is a great example of Australian R&D being commercialised in Australia, and it's still here, and it's employing a lot of Australians. CSL, as I said, was funded by government almost exclusively until the early 90s, maybe, or even a bit later, was when it was publicly listed. So, and ResMed's another one, I think. But how do we get another 50 of those that commercialise in Australia and then stay in Australia? I mean, the notion of politicians galloping around creating jobs, I mean, I just find that incomprehensibly stupid. The only way they can create a job is if they build infrastructure or they employ public servants. Now, all of which are good things, but I mean, business actually creates jobs. Government doesn't.
Yes.
So I think it's incredible. I mean, the Innovation Venture Fund, I mean, there's nothing new in that thought. I mean, I think we should have a long-term venture fund. The government invests in high-profile either infrastructure or science or innovative R&D. And this nation-building projects, I mean, when I talk to people now, they say, gosh, we've done the Snowy Rivers scheme. That was one nation-building project we did. And you say, oh, well, that was finished in 1957, 54. And they say, oh, well, what about the NBN? You say, yeah, well, that hasn't gone nearly as well as it could have. I mean, it is going. But, it's pretty hard to name them. And then people start to say, well, what about the Ord River? And you say, well, that was really good for Western Australia, and then they didn't do anything with it. Talk about the Sydney Tunnel or different projects like that, which are, if you like, state-building projects.
Yeah, but it's even very difficult to, I'm not sure if there is one, but like picturing in my mind a map that actually had all these projects, even if they're not by definition nation building. It'd be nice to actually see everything that's going on one sort of virtual map so that you could actually understand how they link to each other. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting, and I'm unsure if we looked at the infrastructure, the National Infrastructure body, they've possibly got some of those images.
Yeah.
I mean, think about some of the national infrastructure that we know and love, but we take for granted. Man, all of our airports were built by governments. We have a national airport system, which probably is as good as most, but now they're all privately owned, but they're all started by government. There's a lot of our water infrastructure and a whole range of those all our transport infrastructure. While it's not that good, it could be a lot better. It's all been funded by government. So it's not as if government can't do things. It's just that the business world think they can do it better. And I mean, my suggestion is that some of it's just puffery, if you like. I don't think there are some things business does nearly as well as government. But anyway, I think that, I could chat on for hours, but I think if we look at the two bits, I mean, what are the moonshots? And that's a conversation everyone can have just sitting around the table at home. What could be a great aspiration that would motivate people in Australia, or a series of them? And what are the 10 steps? And if anyone can come up with better ones, I think that'd be a great thing, and get them, have a conversation about how we move Australia forward. There's a whole range of questions, and I won't go through them all, but, our grandchildren might like to ask us when we're old. Certainly I wasn't smart enough to think about these things when I was someone's grandchild, but I'm sure. Where are the great Australian businesses built by Australians? And are there any Australian global brands? Where are the industries that exist because of the billions invested in Australian research? Why are we a branch office country? Will anyone in the world be looking to Australia as a model for industry building and wealth creation in 2075? I mean, they're the sorts of questions that I think are worth taking away and saying, so what are we going to do about some of these things now?
Yeah, particularly that last, which is, I guess, why it is the last question, Ben, but will anyone in the world be looking to Australia as a model for industry building and wealth creation in 2075? We need an answer to that question.
We certainly do. And I sure as hell am working on it. Thanks.
I'm on board too, and you're welcome, Ben. We will keep talking about it and watch this space, listeners, because we're going to bring it all together and come to the Innovation in Australia website. There will be more information there. And lovely chatting with you, Ben, today.
Yep. It's been a great 10 sessions so far.
It has. More to come.
Okay. Cheers.
See you.